Awesome. Welcome everyone to this expert AMA with Mark Bowley. Is it Bowley or
Bowley?
Bowley, sorry. Yeah, really excited to have Mark here today to talk all things design and no code. And again, yeah, and I shouldn't really be using design that broadly, but I don't expect Mark to cover everything in design over the course of the next hour, but hopefully some few snippets that will help us with our no-code projects and apply it to them. So the format is going to look like this. So we're going to hear a little bit about Mark and his background and tiny design lessons and where sort of the origin story, where that's come from. Before then, getting a quick 101 of design, so hopefully taking away some actionable tips that we can apply to our no-code projects, and then we'll just open it up for questions that you have for Mark. So yeah, you guys know the drill, and hopefully we'll be done sort of just short of the hour. But yeah, happy to pass over to Mark to take it away.
Thanks, Max. Hi, everyone. I'm not sure how many of you know me. I obviously know Mark. I was saying to Max, this feels a bit weird for me because I still feel like I'm sort of fairly at the beginning of my no-code journey or maker journey. But I'll give you a bit of an intro anyway into what I've done and where I'm at. Obviously, I'm a designer. I live in the UK. I've actually been in design more than a couple of decades, which I don't shout about very often, but I've been working quite a while. I started in design agencies in London, which was working on a lot of marketing design and brand design. And I did that for quite a while. Then I went on to do work at sort of client side at some big companies. And I've been independent for about 10 years working for my own clients. As I said, I mostly do sort of marketing design, brand design, and I'm all the way over to sort of web and app design. So I'm not really an expert in any particular area, which is like what Max was saying. I don't specialize in like UI, UX or product or anything like that, but I have, I kind of see that as a strength because I'm more of a sort of problem solving designer. I can kind of pick up on detail and apply my skills to sort of anything, which is just kind of how I got into no code as well. Kind of my instincts are sort of clean aesthetics and detail. So I'm kind of a detail person rather than a big picture designer, which probably helps, the kind of things that people are looking for with tips in no code. And I also love, tech and the whole community with no code. It's been really interesting, since I got involved in it about 6 months ago. So how did I get into no code? Well, in the last few years doing work for clients, I've actually been doing a lot more sort of digital consulting rather than design, which is sort of solving problems, creating tools, workflows and automations. So I kind of understand, or already understood, the principles of building things with multiple tools and without code, because I'm not a coding designer. I can do bits of code like HTML, CSS, that sort of thing, but I don't like to do it. So I try and avoid it and build with what I can. To be honest, all that stuff, I kind of call it designing anyway, because you're still, designing with no code tools is still just, it's like any other design, but you're just using more of a systems or product mentality than web design or something like that. So this year I kind of got really involved in no code because I wanted to get more social with people, meet other communities. So I kind of stepped up on Twitter, my Twitter account I hadn't used for like about 10 years, resurrected it, jumped in with 2 feet, and really it got involved with everyone. Mark knows this because we've been chatting a few times. So I got really active, joined a few communities like MakerPad, things like that. and just really got involved with talking to people about no code, building things. I've been building my own experiments, projects, and tools. You may have seen one called Deck of Card. I don't know if anyone's seen that. So that was one of my prominent ones, but various other ones, and I've done sort of lots of glide apps for clients and things like that too. So that's kind of how I got into no code. And to be honest, I've really enjoyed the whole experience of the way people kind of act in this community, because it's more than just design. It's really fun to be part of, and I really enjoy it. So which is why I kind of got into creating something to help people in this community for design, because design is obviously one of my strengths. And a couple of months ago, probably back in about sort of May time, I joined Cuppa, the I don't know even what you call it, it's the sort of networking tool on Zoom, and started talking to a lot of no code people, one-to-one makers and founders, and I realized there was a trend in all the conversations we had, which was that they were all really frustrated with design. They were covering too many jobs already. Everyone knows this. You're trying to build a product or a project, and you're trying to do everything from building it, marketing it, and all the, all the systems involved, but trying to do design as well seemed to be too much for a lot of people who simply didn't know, enough basics to make it either look better or be easier to use. And a lot of people expressed to me that they didn't like to launch these things because it was kind of holding them back from launching, because they weren't happy with the design. So I kind of found that strange, because I see design as a natural step up for most makers, because they're already driven to make things of value for people. So adding design to that is quite a natural progression, and I think it just takes a little bit of knowledge and help. And one of the other things people said to me was that they didn't want to do long courses or read another long book, which they didn't know how to apply. So, excuse me. So I decided to go about it in a different way, which was creating something called Tiny Design Lessons, which you might have heard of, which is basically, at its core, it's basically a book, but a small book where there are about 50 tiny lessons, 1 page per lesson, and it's not full of words. It's mostly just a quick tip to get you enough knowledge that you can kind of then apply that and move on. It's as I said, each one's kind of bite-sized, because I didn't want to make it too in-depth. People find a lot of design books are quite sort of jargon-filled or too overly detailed, basically, is what people have said. So what I'm trying to do with it is give people enough that they know how to make something look visually good enough that they can ship it, or that it covers enough usability basics to help you ship, or just that they are or just to make your projects more usable and delightful to use, because I think delightful is a good word to use in that design shouldn't just be about functions and aesthetics. It should also help people feel that it's enjoyable, basically. So, like with Deck of Card, I tried to inject some humor into it. So something we should all try and do. Other than that, I'm trying to build it in public. So I'm trying to be sort of transparent about it, which it kind of involves in updating people regularly, but I'm trying to just not hide behind designer tools or designer techniques, where I only publish things that are really polished, because I think that would be acting too much like a designer rather than helping makers, really, because I think transparency would help in that situation. I can probably show you some example pages if I can just share the screen. Hold on. I think that's working. 1 second. Oh, apologies for this. Zoom is not letting me share.
Let me try and, oh.
Has it done it now?
Yeah, no, yeah. All good, all good.
You can see Acrobat.
We can see the front page of Tiny Design Lessons.
Excellent. Okay, so this is basically just a prototype because I've not really built the whole thing yet. What I'm aiming to do is this book of like 50 lessons, but really I'm trying to make it more of a collection that could sort of keep going, and it could become 100 or more because there are tons of things to cover in design. So what I'm starting with is the book where I've done this prototype, which is basically just a few sample pages. Mark's probably seen this before, but it's probably a bit rough around the edges, so just bear that in mind. It's not the final thing yet. Obviously, the cover, it's a simple book. Each page will be something like this, where I have basically it's one lesson per page, as I said before. All it has on it is minimal text, headline, obviously there, a little bit of explanation, some sort of visual to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, and then actionable tips at the bottom. And I've also added in here that there will be extra resources for most lessons. So if you find the lesson's too short or simple, or you're not quite sure what I'm meaning, then there'll be extra stuff in there that you can access, stored on the web or on cloud storage. Will be, checklists, templates, and things like that. So this is one lesson where I was trying to get across the idea that consistency helps on common elements. A lot of people I've seen are struggling to get simple things like headings the same on different pages of a website or an app. And I was insinuating here that if you decide on these up front, you can then apply them consistently, because consistency really helps improve the experience basically for people. Another one was thinking about layouts differently. I've seen a lot of people simply opt for completely left aligned or centered layouts when designing, which it doesn't have to be the case all the time, because there are other options, but people aren't confident with it. So what I was saying here was you can mix up the layouts and align things differently. Again, people just need to know some basics and try it out. Colors are a massive one. I think I could write probably about tons of pages on this, but this particular one I've basically tried to say to people, keep it simple, because if you try and add loads and loads of colors to a design or anything you're doing, it can get really confusing for people or overwhelming. So the tips here are to try and use things like just a couple of colors, main colors, and then the rest can be neutrals that you use for other things. Another big question that crops up all the time is, should you use photos or illustrations? Obviously there's a trend at the moment with a lot of products where everyone's using illustrations, but it's not always the simplest thing. It's not always the right thing to do, because illustrations help in that they give you control over the visual style, but and you can be sort of subject specific, where you can show an exact subject you're trying to illustrate because you can find the exact one for the exact thing. But they don't give much of a sort of, people can't relate to them emotionally as well. So there's just that to consider. And with photos, it's the opposite. Obviously, you can create more of an emotional connection, but it's really hard to be consistent with a visual style across a whole page or app or whatever you're building, because if you use stock images, they can often be lit in different ways and different backgrounds, and it kind of looks disjointed. But on the plus side, people relate to them more. So it's just a case of making an appropriate decision. Another thing I've suggested to people is creating a user persona. This is kind of a UX design trick that people use to, if you're not sure about making decisions on design. So if you're not sure what colors to use or what fonts to use or what kind of overall look to create, it can often help to start with a user persona where you at least just write down the basics of what the person is that you're aiming it at, so that it just helps you make decisions as you go along, because you can benchmark all those decisions back to the user persona. Comfortable column widths is another one, which is where you shouldn't always default to your text column widths going the whole width of a wide page, because it's really hard for people to read. We like with newspapers, we all fare better with more narrow columns. So it's just a simple tip there to keep it to a certain number of characters per line. But at the same time, you don't need to get into too much detail with that sort of thing. It's just picking something that's comfortable rather than going with the default that a lot of apps give you. And the last one I think here is, I've seen a lot of makers with really, really big pictures and really small text recently. And so what I've said to a few people is try and flip that balance, where you are doing the opposite, where your message is the important part and the image is supporting that. Because if it's the other way around, people get distracted or they're not sure what to look at, and it doesn't really get across your main message very easily. So those are just a small selection of the kind of quick things that I am aiming to do. As I said, there's going to be about 50 of those in there, but I will probably go on to do more in a sort of web collection. Let me just stop that one. If anyone's got any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we can chat in a minute. So I know Max was saying about a sort of a list of sort of the design 101, but I've kind of I'd kind of prepared it as those tips I had in the book, and I'm happy for people to ask sort of questions now rather than me kind of drone on about other design tips and things. Would that be all right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's great. Oh, hey, Kenneth. Good to see you.
Hi.
Yeah, no, yeah, that'd be great, and I guess that's really nice, giving us a taste of a behind the scenes look at the tiny design lessons, and it's exactly like what I was like hoping to see, because that's so digestible and so actionable. So really, yeah, really excited to see more and hear more about it. But yeah, let's open it up. Yeah, just guess fire away if you have any questions. I've got a few, but I'll wait for you guys to send them across.
Hey, Mark.
Hi.
Dan here. Hey. Yeah, thanks for sharing it. I think it's such a useful thing. I'm currently, as I told some of the guys in the team, taking a Figma course to try and understand design better, because I think I kind of have the eye, but then also sometimes feel a certain way, and then that means that the design ends up being very disjointed. So like having these rules are really, or structures in place are really useful. And I was wondering, like, are you predominantly creating this to help makers, or are you gonna try and figure out how to like monetize this in some way, or is there like, what are your future plans outside of the 100 or 50 or so, or 100 tips?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've kind of focused so far, excuse me, on the book, where I'm, excuse me, I need a drink. I really want to help makers with it, and I think there's a lot of scope to just create lots of tips. But I've focused on the book so far, where I can, because one of the things I'm trying to do is learn how to produce products myself, and I've treated the whole sort of the book as that process where I'm learning how to do that at the same time. So I'm kind of, when you say monetize, I'm obviously going to charge for the book, but there will be plenty of sort of free stuff that I will put out there as well, you know, in a web collection or whatever, on Twitter and in the newsletter. So I think there's going to be plenty of stuff to help people, and probably, you know, I will, if the book is successful, then I may do things like workshops or stuff like that. So
cool, excellent, thank you.
Hi Mark, it's
hello.
It's been a few weeks on the progress. I saw a prototype a few weeks ago. The progress is great, and yeah, I'm just wondering when we can get our hands on it. I'm quite excited by it, and yeah, I just think it's something to you know, that I want to get my hands on. So have you got a date for completion? Or are you
yeah, I know this is an important question. I've kind of earmarked the end of September to launch the book. I'm aiming to sort of share a few bits and pieces of snippets of it before that, though. But that's the kind of timeline that I'm working to. I was hoping to do it a little bit earlier, but I just think it needs to be done properly rather than just quick.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm not trying to rush you. I'm just, you know, just sort of trying to, you know, get a bit of a gauge on it.
Yeah, sure.
I'm very keen to
appreciate it,
to use it, and it just seems that you've hit on a real sort of poignant thing to do there, because and the way you're going to deliver it, you know, everybody, you know, it doesn't have to even be just no code stuff. You know, everybody could do with a bit of education on design and how things look, and just the way that, you know, that you present those topics. It prompts you to think more, you know, and then maybe, like you said, research some more on, you know, on those resources that you can do as an extra sort of extra bit of value. But yeah, I'm very excited by it, and yeah, I think you're doing a smashing job there, and a great service. So yeah, and you know, if you can, you know, if you get some success and then you can broaden it a little bit, that'd be brilliant. You know, with like you said, with some workshops or with some sort of website extension type thing, then perfect. Yeah, and yeah, I think yeah, I think you're on a winner there.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, because you know, it can be. I was talking to someone last night. You know, was saying that it can be applied to anyone who, in this current sort of you know, post-COVID situation, has been forced to take on a design role in some way, whether it's makers or marketers or anyone. But obviously I'm doing this for the no-code community, but the general idea is that people need to know some of this stuff because they're having to do it more often. And one of the interesting points about actually writing it is that to make it so simple is actually hard, because I'm kind of reverse engineering a lot of design courses, which are long, tedious, you know, detailed. And when I started doing some of it, I thought, oh, hang on, because it's really hard to actually get something across in so little text. but it can be done, and I think it's a challenge that I'm enjoying, because one of the things I like doing in all forms of my work is making things simple for people to understand. That's what design is in itself. So why not do it with design lessons too? So yeah, the simpler the better. And obviously people can, you know, raise a hand or ask or look into more anyway. That's the plan.
Yeah, and I think that's where you're shining, because that is difficult just to communicate. So, and that's why when I say it makes you think, you're doing it right there, because when I'm reading what you've got there, I'm visualizing, you know, where it's applying to stuff I've been doing or I've done, and, you know, or lessons, you know, that I'll be sort of, you know, taking, you know, to a practical stage, you know, and yeah, it's, even in front cover there, it just looks great to me. You know, you've got it nailed, and yeah, I'm excited to see it come through. So roll on September, and yeah, good luck to you.
Thanks, Mark. I'm an advocate of less is more, so you know that should apply to everything really. So.
Hey Mark, I've got a few questions. Firstly, it's really good. I'm really looking forward to it. I was speaking to Max today about, you know, the things that are lacking in the Maker No Code community, and design and marketing are two of those things, and they both sort of cross over anyway. And like Dan says, I've got a good eye for it. I can see when something looks good, but trying to define why it looks good and what, you know, what are the components that make that look good is sometimes difficult. So it's good to see on your examples you compare, you know, right and wrong. You had the tick, and just the way that you're going to try and condense that into one-page lessons is really good, because my attention span is not very long, you know, and I'm learning all these things already, and just that condensed information just to get you started, and then hopefully from there. One of the things you spoke about was kind of trends and things like that, and how important is it to try and make something look modern, you know, with the things changing all the time? So at the moment, all the no-code stuff has the illustrations and things like that, and as soon as you look at a page, you know it's kind of a no-code page. How important is it to try and keep up with those things, or just to have good-looking design? There's a balance, I guess.
Yeah, there is. Important question, I think. I'm the sort of person who doesn't follow trends too much. Obviously, we all follow trends because there's no point in making something look 10 years old. But I tend to have, I've always kind of avoided really trendy stuff right from design college onwards, because you're creating, by doing that, you're kind of creating something in particular rather than it being about the product or the piece. You're trying to just keep up rather than make it, you know, you're not focusing on what you're trying to do. I think this comes back to the question or the chat we had about at the beginning of the call. So the app, which is obviously trying to differentiate itself from Zoom by being trendy and different, is an example where that's kind of suitable because it's differentiating for that reason. But generally speaking, I would say focus less on trends, but keep an eye on trends, if that makes a lot of sense, because you don't want to be just copying or, you know, being the same as the next person. But at the same time, you can't be a million miles away from it, because then it just looks weird or odd and people don't get it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Go ahead and hop in real quick. What's up, guys?
Hi.
First question, I guess, I heard your mention about color schemes and then keeping, you know, color schemes simple. Do you have any tool recommendations as far as for makers to go grab color schemes? Because when I whipped up my website, it was just like, okay, what's the easiest thing to grab? Like, do I want a dark or a light color scheme? And then the second part to the question is, how do you find good font families or good font pairings? I found a few websites, but that will be suitable for the personality of your website, I guess.
Yeah, it's tricky. Resources like that is a tricky one. There's always new ones. In fact, yeah, Max has just shared the one I was going to suggest. Happy Hues is quite a clever one for just kind of grabbing great color schemes that have been prepared. There's a few others I can probably mention or drop them into to a follow-up to this call, but it's one of the things that I'm going to try and do with Tiny Design Lessons, in that obviously people need these resources, because you can't just tell them to go off and find fonts or stuff like that. But there are some that help you. There are tools where you can kind of analyze what other websites have used for colors or fonts, which I can share. You can, there are sites that list the fonts that are used in prominent websites. So there's quite a few of those, and probably too many for me to kind of just quote off here, but I'm happy to supply those following up to this, if that helps.
Oh yeah, please, thank you. Because I guess I've noticed part of my journey is like I haven't been as awesome as like Dan and done like the Figma courses or anything, but it's like you throw something together and then you have recommendations from a bunch of people as far as like what to do with your website or how to make it a bit more comfortable or how to read it better. And it's which one of those, which bits of those information do you actually take? Or why am I choosing this font on this color background to make it easier to read? Things like
okay,
that. So
that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess I'll just leave it at that. Let Max ask his questions.
Yeah, I'm happy to list some of those, and I'll be putting some of those in the book as more resources, because I think it's useful to have a simple lesson, but then also to figure out what to do and where to go next. So yeah, there'll be plenty of that. Max, do you have a question?
I feel bad now. No, Kenneth, if you have more, please go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's all good. I mean, I'll pop in later on if I got some more.
Yeah.
Awesome. I've got a few just that go a little bit around the houses. So I'm intrigued. Is something that you're seeing, and I know I definitely do it, is I jump into the build and the functionality first and then design second. Is it important really to flip that and actually design, wireframe, and then build? And I hear that is best practice, but I assume it is, but and I reckon that's like common pitfall of makers that are just eager to create something functional but not necessarily usable. And I think that's what I do, and lots of other people do. But general thoughts on that would be interesting.
Yeah, we all do it, I think, don't we? We were all eager to build, especially with no code. And sometimes I think that's fine, just jumping straight in and building. But I think if you can sort of arm yourself with some knowledge, then it makes it all the better as you go along. So yes, wireframes are good, planning the design is good, or doing it in Figma first or something like that. But it depends on the project. If you're doing a really big project, then yes, I would say it's best to start with design or a wireframe or something like that, because you can, you'll get muddled or lose track. But I think there's plenty of smaller ones, especially if you're doing a really basic MVP or something, is to just jump in and build it, but maybe go through a checklist of things that you're covering. So, you've not kind of broken the rules or that it's got some sort of barrier to use from certain people. Without wanting to give an evasive answer, I think it really depends on the project. So big project, yes, do more planning. Smaller project, try and do it as you go along, or at least before you launch. Just check that you've covered things, which is kind of what I'm hinting at with what I'm doing here, is that you can kind of use it as a checklist if you wanted to. So, if you've built something and you're just not quite sure before you launch it, then you could just run through some important things. And I'm aiming to kind of give, sort of group the lessons where you can, if you're about to launch, here's a checklist, or if you're just starting, here's a checklist, and things like that. So different groups of lessons for different situations.
Yeah, that would be really useful, and actually links to my next question quite nicely, because and I think we were discussing it earlier, Jason, was around starting off on a blank page or using a template, and there's obviously pros and cons to each. And not coming from a design background, which like most of the no code community haven't, means that starting from a blank page is really daunting, which means that you're more likely to go for the template, but then it's less expression of your project and your product that you're putting out there. So any tips for, because I always really want to start on a blank page, but I always get super scared of it. So any tips for starting out with a fresh page and designing off the bat in that way?
Yeah, sure. It's like every designer's nightmare too. You know, a blank page is always the hardest to start with. But what I tend to do is, if I'm doing it that way, where I'm just say jumping straight into card to build something, you know, and I'm using the blank page. I always use the blank page, to be honest. But if you're doing it that way, you could kind of treat it as a wireframe while you're building, where, you know, don't get involved in the fonts, don't get involved in the colors, don't get involved in adding the pictures or whatever, but just get some objects and sections down on the page. So you're kind of building it that way. I think helps, rather than, because you can get distracted too quickly. And then I kind of reverse it and sort of iterate layers of finesse onto it as I go. So, you know, go through the fonts, make sure get all of those kind of nice, go through the colors and do it in waves, but always stand back every now and then and have a look. So yeah, it's sort of like design. If you're drawing a picture, you draw an outline and then work upwards, kind of thing, instead of just focusing on, you know, one part.
Yeah,
that's how I do it.
That is super useful. Yeah, because I often have that like instant decision paralysis of like what color do I pick and what font do I pick, and then I just stop. So yeah, that's actually a really good tip. Thanks for that. And then just moving slightly away from the design stuff, but just intrigued on your decision to like build in public, and what benefits that has, and what you're experiencing by building in public.
Yeah. Why did I do it? Well, as I said earlier, I was trying to be. I'm really conscious of the fact that if I treat this as a design project, that I could end up just kind of building and finessing and making this thing beautiful, and then kind of launching it to fanfare. But that doesn't help people in the community. You know, particularly the no-code community. Everyone wants to know, you know, what are you using, how are you getting on, you know, what is your process, and that I think is just as important as the finished product. So I kind of saw, I think it was KP on Twitter was starting to talk about building in public, and I just thought, you know what, that just fits completely with not behaving like a designer here and helping people. So, you know, you can see the process. I'll share my own maker journey, which is, you know, learning to build products and how many people, you know, what my metrics are and how I'm getting on and how many subscribers I have. I think it all helps. It helps me to be more accountable. It helps makers understand process who are, you know, maybe they're just a bit behind and are learning these things. But it also helps community. I think it's made a big difference in terms of people gathering around the product or what I'm doing, just as much as me putting value out on Twitter or wherever in communities. It works just the same way. It all helps. And I've, you know, as Mark was saying, you know, I've not launched this yet. I've kind of, all I've done is launched it as a concept and shown maybe 10 to 20 makers a prototype in one-to-one calls, and I've managed to get sort of a number of pre-orders and about 200 people signed up to the mailing list, which to me is quite surprising because I've not made a big launch and I've not put lots of material out yet. I've just talked to a lot of people and I've explained on Twitter what I'm doing, and that I think has been quite successful. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no,
it's a powerful thing to do, I think, but brave. You know, you need to be kind of committed to it and do it, but it does help, I think.
Yeah, and just on that, yeah, that really definitely answers the question. Where do you draw the line on the building in public thing? Because
Yeah.
that's the bit I don't grasp. Is like, how often, like, what sort of detail do you share, and how do you define like what's going to be interesting and what isn't? Is what I find difficult.
Yeah, it's a good question as well. Probably a good example is if you're talking to like a friend who's unrelated to the subject.
Okay.
You know, if you spoke to them maybe once a week, or someone in your family, and they said, "How's it going?" You know, so you'd give them an update, maybe of you know, the highs and lows, what happened this week. You know, celebrate small wins, or give them a quick rundown of your metrics, because it puts it into context, rather than if you just sit there for half an hour going, well, you know what happened this week, and you know, it gets too chatty, then you know you've overshared. But if you give people a bit of a summary of kind of the highlights and low points, but not so much that it's just like, ugh. I think that's where I draw the line, as if I was talking to someone who just doesn't know anything about me.
Yeah.
Or what I'm doing in no code.
Yeah, that's a good, really good example. Yeah, that makes it easier for me to understand where that line is. That's useful. And I've not got any more questions for now. Anyone? Open. Yeah, anyone got any more?
Yeah, I'm just intrigued as to how your career in design and all the education you've had there helps you with thinking about data. You've done quite a lot of Glide apps, and you know, obviously they're sort of founded on a Google sheet. So, what do you think that, you know, what you know and the point you're coming from has got any bearing on how you prepare data or think about data, or you know, how it's sort of, you know, allocated or grouped, or you know, is there any? Because, you know, I come from a sort of a quantity surveying background, which is sort of a bit sort of numbers based and analytical. So I think that's sort of like had some leaning on how I do things. So I was just wondering, you know, if you can sort of say the same thing coming from that different perspective.
Possibly. I think there are different types of designers. You know, some are all about, you know, fancy, you know, for want of a better word, kind of beautiful things, you know, where it's all about the kind of the look or the trend or making something really super polished. I come from a sort of more sort of systems kind of design, where I'm a problem solver. So I think that helps, because my mind works more sort of analytically and in a sort of planning and process way with design, which I think lends nicely into, you know, data in itself. I mean, I've done, you know, loads of websites over the last 10 years. Sometimes I have to get involved in what the process is of the data, you know, being moved around. So, you know, especially with workflow. So I've kind of found that a natural fit with my mentality as a designer, but I don't think every designer has that side to them. It's just different focus. So I think it's not necessarily something in education, because design education is more, well, when I did it, it was more focused on, you know, the sort of basics that I'm talking about here, rather than data or anything like that. That's quite a new thing. But I think it just comes down to what you are as a person. And I as I said, I'm not a big person for, you know, making things look really beautiful. I'm more about making them more functional as a designer. So that just fits naturally, I think, with data.
Yeah, I just wonder if we were given the same challenge, where I'd approach it slightly differently to you, and we'd come to the same conclusion, but, you know, via a different way. It's just an interesting, you know, concept. You know, how
I know, yeah. I think we probably would, but we'd probably end up at the same place.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah, yeah. Mine look terrible, yours look fantastic, but
Yeah.
we do the same thing.
I'll just explain it visually. I've noticed. Yeah, sorry, carry on.
Now carry on. Finish saying, Matt.
That was it.
What was my question now? Yeah. So one of the problems I have, I start designing something and I'm never quite satisfied with it, and so I keep tinkering, and it kind of gets worse and worse. Do you when you finish a project, are you totally happy with it, or are you 99%? And when do you know to step away from it and just leave it alone?
Oh, good one. No, it happens to designers as well. I think when I started my career, there was a lot more printed design, and we had to have this kind of cut-off point where you had to send it to print, and it was like sending. You had to prise it out of your hands. No more changes. But that obviously has gone out of the window in the sense that now you can make infinite changes even after you've supposedly finished it. So no, I don't think I ever feel completely happy with anything, but you have to kind of say, that's done, let's move on, because like any maker project or no code project, you could go on forever. So no, I think we're just the same, and I don't ever feel completely happy. I look back at jobs I did 10 years ago and I'm not happy with them, but that's, I think you have to let go of the perfectionism and just say, I've done my best here at the moment, and that's it.
Yeah, that's great. That's reassuring.
Anyone else got any questions, or if not questions, anyone got any suggestions of things that they'd like to see me include?
I do have a question real quick, just to spin off of my last one about color palettes and whatnot. While I was listening to you guys talk, I was taking a look at those websites that Max had shot over as well for color palettes. And the one thing I saw missing is there are only like a couple, maybe 3 ever examples for like dark color palettes. I don't know why I was stuck on a dark color palette for my current project, but actually, okay, I do know why. But there isn't enough context or enough explanation for how to properly build, I guess, a dark palette. So what's your process, or like what do you recommend to make sure, like you were talking about usability and enjoyability earlier, that experience is enjoyable as opposed to like on a typical, like a trendy color palette?
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think the darker color palettes, or I presume you're talking about websites that are predominantly dark rather than like a white page or something. That'd be right.
Yeah.
So I think that's a relatively new trend in the last few years, and I'm not sure there's much strong guidance on it. And I think people are quite figuring it all out as they go along. I've not really done any because it's not really my thing. Maybe that's just because I've been in design for quite a while, and it's I feel kind of resistance to it, but I do like them when I see them. So I don't have any big answers right now, but I think that's a good thing to include, and I'll look into it.
Yeah, please.
Sure.
I guess maybe like a little follow-up question. Sorry, Dan, I see like you're
That's right.
hopping in. Any recommendations, I guess, with a light color palette to kind of translate what I feel is like a somber effect, or like something that's a little bit more emotional with a dark color palette? How you typically translate it with a light background, if that makes sense.
You mean, or just how to make it more somber as a lighter color palette?
Yeah, so I guess like if you're going with a lighter color palette, okay, light backgrounds, whites, maybe yellows, I see as like a trend or whatnot, like yellow and black, but like right now my color palette is like black, teal, blue, things like that. And if I were to make that lighter, which I feel like is the route I need to go to make that a little bit more appealing to the eye, or just like on future projects, if I feel like a darker color palette is necessary, what's your light background option, and how do you keep it from being like too bright, too vibrant, too fun, and maybe like communicate a message around something a little heavier, like social impact, health, environmental racism, things like that?
If I was trying to make something a little bit more lighter or softer, I would tend to sort of look at the contrast between the colors. So for example, instead of having a white background for the main sort of page, is to make that an off-white, because then that kind of interacts with the other colors that you have in a very different way. I can dig out some examples after the call, but just changing the background color so it kind of looks white, but it's not white, can have quite a big impact on the colors that you're using anyway, and it can just take the kind of edge off the contrast between the two. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, that's fantastic.
And do you have one? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think one thing that's kind of missing from the design or like world that is in no code is, I think you've kind of shown it before, but it's like, say for example, I was trying to use Webflow before and I didn't really understand what a heading H1 was, H2, H3,
Okay.
H4. Like there's so much context that is not there because you just come in with an idea and you're like, oh, I want to make this thing, and then there's and I think having some contextual kind of like design tips, like say it's like, oh, these are all the tips that are design tips that would be useful around headers, or like these are all the design tips that would be useful around like images. So that within your course or your book, maybe each of the pages might have some tags, for example, so that I'd be like, okay, these are all the things that I need to know if I'm working with images. There's size stuff, there's color stuff, there's this stuff, which might just make it easier when dealing with the problems that you see. Because oftentimes, like Jason was saying, like you might see your project and be like, okay, I know there's something wrong with the images, but I don't know quite what that is. And there might be a number of rules that might be needed to solve it. It might be size, it might be the color palette, it might be the contrast or whatever. So like contextually, there may be like, you may see that there's a problem with fonts, but there might be like a number of tips that work with fonts across your book. So I think like having, I don't know if I'm being clear. But
no, I know exactly what you mean, and I think I was sort of hinting at it earlier that I'm hoping to put in lots of different kind of lists instead of an index, have lots of different kind of indexes or contents pages that are, as you say, per subject. You know, even if there's a whole lot of them, I think it helps because you don't want to be flicking through the whole thing trying to find that one lesson.
Yeah.
Okay? So yeah, probably tags or you know, subject indexes, things like that, definitely.
Cool, awesome.
Yeah, just going on what Dan was saying, that's the same thing that sprung to mind when you said about suggestions, and CSS would be, it might be crossing the line a little bit, but something to do with the box model and how that can be you know, explained a little bit clearer, because I think people dive into Webflow and they're flummoxed straight away with CSS, you know, and you do have to have a little bit of a clue about what it is and how it affects the elements on the page. And, you know, that it will, if you apply it to one thing and the classes are throughout the page, it affects everything. You know, that obviously that's the feature of CSS, but
okay,
just some sort of bleed over into CSS just might be a bit helpful, because obviously every maker who's doing something, they're doing something web-based or an app-based thing, and the design is more often than not CSS. So yeah, maybe you could have a little bit of a weighting towards that as a suggestion. You know, it might be.
Yeah, good point. It's like Dan was saying about, you know, H1s, H2s. So yeah, sure, good idea.
Yeah, just to wrap up, the only other thought I had, which I think you already do in the book, it looks like you are already doing, but just to maybe add like another layer to this, and this may be like version 2 and when you add on all the other stuff, but it's just doing like teardowns of bad websites and sort of reviews of good websites and why they're, and when I say like real life websites, would be interesting just to like add another layer of like evidence onto your analysis of that like individual page with the
Yes.
Just to almost bring it to life even more. But that's the only thing I'd say.
Yeah, I agree. And I'd kind of thought that might end up in the sort of more resources where it's necessary. If I think it helps the lesson, then I'll add them in. Yeah, good idea.
Thanks. Yeah, no, that sounds good. Unless anyone has got any other questions, I think we'll wrap up there. All good. Cool. Yeah, no, it's super helpful. Thanks so much, Mark.
Great.
Your time.
Pleasure.
And, yeah, sorry it was slightly late notice, but yeah, I think I got a lot of value from this, certainly, and hope others did too. So yeah, thanks so much. Anything you want to say before we wrap up, Mark?
No, yeah, I appreciate it. It's been fun to do, and it's just like talking to people, makers one-to-one. I get so much out of this kind of conversation. It's great. So thanks very much. Appreciate the support, everyone, and hope it's useful.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we all eagerly await the release in late September time-ish.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And
cool.
if anyone's obviously interested, just sign up at tinydesignlessons.com, and I'll be updating people on the mailing list.
Already done. Thank you.
Yeah, already
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, guys. Cheers, guys.
Thanks.
All the best.
Thank you.